All right, so welcome to lecture 4, part 2. I consider this part 2 because it builds right off from where we left off about demand and supply, and I consider it like an integral part of, the same kind of material that we were talking about before. So, it's lecture 4, part 2. We're talking about consumer and producer surplus. Basically, there's a way of quantifying in different markets, if you have like a perfectly competitive market or a monopoly market, how well consumers are doing relative to producers or relative to a policy change or some sort of market change. How does that change producer welfare and consumer welfare and or well-being? You can say welfare is. You probably think of something else. So how does a policy change or a market structure change or a demand change or something like that change the underlying well-being of consumers and producers? That's the goal of today's lecture. Okay. So it feeds directly into the market structure stuff that we're talking about and the plots of supply and demand and willingness to pay and all that. It's all directly linked. It's all directly connected. So let's go. All right, so just a roadmap of what we're going to do today. I'm going to start with the definition of welfare economics, and this has nothing to do with welfare in the sense of money received from the government. Rather, welfare can just mean well-being. And like I said, it's just a way of measuring how well consumers and producers are doing in a particular market, and that allows you to quantify things if you want to change a policy or something like that. Okay. Then we're going to build the demand schedule and demand curve. And we had done this before with, Joey, Jack, and John with their hot dog consumption and their willingness to pay. So we started with the willingness to pay, which we took as given. And then we plotted that based on prices. And then from there, that was what we called the demand schedule, where if the price is equal to 0, this is how many goods are demanded. This is the quantity demanded. The price equals 1. This is the quantity demanded. So it gave us an underlying function between price and quantity demanded, and then we plotted that, and that became our demand function, or our demand curve when we kind of smoothed out the little dots, right? So we're going to do the same thing again today, just a little bit different. We're not going to smooth anything out, but you'll see. And then we'll use that to bring in the next topic of consumer surplus, and then we'll move on from there. Okay. Then we define consumer surplus. This is a word that I'm throwing around, but I don't expect you to have the definition yet. But by the end of this lecture, you should be an expert in consumer surplus. Okay, so you should be able to understand the definition and how it's applied and why it's important. Okay, and then I'll show you consumer surplus dynamics. If there's a demand shift, how does consumer surplus change, essentially? Okay, then do the same thing with producer surplus. And then I'm going to define a kind of separate measure of within welfare economics called Pareto efficiency. And the underlying definition of Pareto efficiency is something's Pareto efficient if I can't make someone else better unless I have to take from, let's say there's 2 people, I can't make person 2 better off unless I have to take away from person 1, okay? So you're Pareto efficient if, in order to make somebody else better, you have to take from one other person, okay? So you can't make somebody better without making someone worse off. So I define that, and I go through a couple examples of Pareto efficiency and why it's important in the real world. I'll eventually build up to. So the first example I'll do is regarding the Hawk and Dove model, show you what's Pareto efficient. Okay, and then I'll define some related concepts of efficiency, namely allocative and productive efficiency, which are related to Pareto efficiency, and they have overlap, but they're not exactly the same thing. Also important. But I think for this class, Pareto efficiency is really the most important part. And anyway, then we'll go back to Pareto efficiency as it applies to trade, And then I'll bring it also back to these related concepts of efficiency too. And then lastly, we'll talk about Pareto efficiency in the context of real markets. Okay.